Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Azure 101 series. Last time we were looking at the cloud adoption framework, specifically the plan phase. So we showed the key considerations in this phase and also some helpful resources that could be used. So for this episode, we're going to be exploring how an organisation can get ready for a cloud migration.
Yeah, that's right, Gina, and we'll then take a quick sneak peek at where this all leads to, which is going to be Azure landing zones and why we need them to get ready for an Azure cloud migration. Now, then in our next video, we're going to dig into each type of these landing zones in a little bit more detail just to make it make sense for you. So let's jump straight in. In the previous video, we talked about creating the strategy and the plan so that we know the why and the what behind our cloud migration. But the ready phase is all about the how, and to get these details of our how, we need to consider the cloud operating model. Now, if you're anything like me, you may be thinking, what is this guy on about when he says operating model? Can I just adopt Azure out of the box? The issue here is that if you don't know how you intend to actually use Azure or your teams to use Azure, you might end up with a configuration that isn't fit for purpose and is quickly outgrown. Now, the worst case scenario is that you end up spending a lot more money to resolve these problems later down the line compared to if you'd adopted it in the first place the correct way in accordance with best practice. So Gina, did you want to cover off the operating models and what we mean?
Sure, thanks Sam. So the operating model you use in Azure will outline your team engagement, and there are 3 options to choose from. So 2 are the traditional deployment methods and 1 is Microsoft recommended best practice. So if your organisation may already use one of these models. So first up we have the decentralised model. This is all about increasing innovation by putting the development team in charge of its own destiny. So this is still a popular way of working for many organisations even now. However, the danger here is that the operating model lacks standardisation of resources and could possibly become more expensive in the future. Secondly, we have the centralised model. This model involves IT infrastructure being managed by a central IT team, and this is great for allowing regulation and control, which is important for any organisation. However, it may overly standardise all workloads, hindering any specific requirements for development teams and even stopping quick wins and innovation. The old saying is really true here, isn't it, Sam? So developers develop and architects architect.
Yeah, that is the dilemma, Gina, and we've seen many times for many different organisations. So how do we actually get an operating model that works well with both of these teams and doesn't limit one or both? The enterprise operating model is actually just the ticket, and it combines the flexibility of the decentralised model with the standardisation and control of the centralised model. And what will happen is the central IT team will be responsible with managing the shared workloads such as networking, identity, baseline security even. Then the application teams can be responsible for managing their specific application workloads using services and tools similarly to the central IT team, and implementing the granular security or granular management that they need without blocking any of their innovation.
That's correct, Sam, and this is the very reason we need a landing zone. So it will help us to deploy the enterprise operating model through the use of platform and application zones. Interestingly, the type of landing zone you deploy will impact the phases that you follow. So let's have a look at what a landing zone is.
Yeah, in a nutshell, landing zone is the building block for setting up your Azure environment and even your operating model. Now, the platform zones are for shared resources, so they may be things like identity, baseline security, or management resources, as I said previously. And this is normally where your central IT team are going to have more of their control and influence. They would actually be able to deploy these zones with all the controls and governance that is needed for the organisation to operate. And the baseline configurations that they can set will also then flow down to the application zones, as well as the governance to make sure it's consistent. Central IT can then monitor and manage all of this centrally. Next, we have application zones, which are for application-specific resources. Now, this could be more granular security resources beyond that of the baseline, or maybe resources like virtual machines, databases, storage, networking, or even development tools. Now, this is normally where the development teams would spend their time, and that would have the flexibility to set the roles and permissions for those zones as required, as long as it didn't conflict with the baseline set by central IT. Meaning if they want to maybe create or set up a new resource, they could do without needing to actually go to central IT and get them involved.
And that makes perfect sense. And it's worth noting that within each of these zones, there are native tools for setting up your Azure environment. So these are Azure blueprints, which provide you with mechanism to repeatedly deploy your policies, roles and templates. Azure policies, which apply the guardrails to your Azure estate, for example, only allowing resources in certain geographical locations. We also have Azure role-based access control, or RBAC, which provide the authentication mechanisms to access, monitor and manage your Azure resources and data on those resources. Azure Resource Manager, or ARM template, which is a JSON file for deploying the environment. The best way to explain this is landing zones are similar to how you would find the foundations of a house or even a skyscraper. The same is true with Azure landing zones.
Yeah, that's a great point, Gina. And once again, like we saw with the operating model, there are actually typically 3 types of landing zone, which we're going to explore in a bit more detail now. So these are Azure Migrate Landing Zone has been the first one, which is normally a single resource group actually set up within an Azure subscription. It will actually have separate networking, shared resources such as maybe Key Vault or Log Analytics. As well as that, it will have a separate resource group for the Azure Migrate data that is then collected prior to the migration. Next, we have the Start Small and Expand landing zones and the Enterprise landing zones. Now, these are where you'll possibly migrate your Azure resources to after you've adopted the cloud. Gina, can you take us through maybe the differences between these last two, because they're quite important, aren't they?
Absolutely. So the Start Small and Expand landing zones gives us an organisation the option to deploy their platform and application zones into a single or maybe even a few subscriptions. They start with a baseline and then add security, governance and compliance over time. And the unit of measure is, in this instance, is resource groups. The enterprise landing zone approach, however, involves deploying into multiple subscriptions with pre-configured resources and controls. The platform and the application zones would be separate, making it easier to scale and monitor as well as manage. The unit of measure this time are subscriptions. So you don't have to be on an enterprise scale to use this type of landing zone. It just references having an enterprise mindset, which is always a good thing to follow. So the enterprise approach requires everything to be ready before migration, making it more complex, while improvements to the enterprise landing zone will still happen. They will be less frequent than the Start Small and Expand approach. So the good news is that there is no right or wrong choice for landing zones. The key is to ensure the landing zone fits your motivations and the business outcomes you defined in your strategy. Organizations can start using Azure immediately and optimize over time using Start Small and Expand, but the goal should be to implement the enterprise landing zone theories. These zones combine centralized control with the freedom to innovate from a decentralized model.
So that's it once again. In our next video, we're going to take a closer look at the landing zones, since they'll also impact the follow-on phases like the management and governing. So until next time, it's goodbye from me, it's goodbye from Gina.
Thanks, goodbye.